では、それでは、お時間になりましたので、皆様お待ちかねの招待講演を始めさせていただきたいと思います。もうすでに画面上にお越しいただいてますけれども、オックスフォード・リーディング・トリーシリーズの、作者、ロデリック・ハントさんと、イラストレーターのアレックス・ブリックタさんの、トークを始めさせていただきます。チャットでのコメントや質問も、大歓迎ということなのですが、英語でお書きいただければと思います。それからお話後に Q&A のセクション、時間を設けておりますが、その時も英語でご質問いただければと思います。それから先ほどちょっとお話してました動画をですね、流していただけるということなんですけれども、万が一ちょっと遅くなれば、効果があるかどうか分かりませんが、カメラを、皆さんのカメラをビデオですね、を停止にしていただいたら、少し、スピードが戻るかもしれません。ご協力よろしくお願いいたします。それでは、高瀬さん、よろしくお願いいたします。
Good morning and good evening. Okay. Mr. Hunt and Mr. Brychta, it's our honor to have you here for our seminar, Kansai seminar, seminar. And as all of you know, probably all of you know, that they are written more than 900 books, ORT books, and then starting from 1985. Then they are read for more than 130 children of 130 countries. Then more than 30 million children are reading Oxford Reading Trees, maybe more than that. And then as the contribution to the literacy in the UK children, they were awarded MBE, Member of the Order of the British Empire, in 2008 by Queen Elizabeth. Yes. And then, as you know, that their Oxford Reading Trees are very, very popular in Japan, not only elementary school children or junior high, but the university students and even adults. They love Oxford Reading Trees. And those books is one of the books that improved and that motivated students to read books. So thank you very much for coming this this morning for you this morning. And then could you please start your presentation?
Can I just say, before Rod jumps in with his presentation, I'd just like to say good evening to everybody who's listening to us in Japan. It's a great honor to be invited to join this seminar. And some of you, of course, have not met us personally. And you may not know that some years ago, Rod and I visited Japan, and we went to several cities. We were in Tokyo and Osaka and Kyoto and Kobe, and we visited many schools. Yoko Yamashita is showing a book that she's got, which was signed by us. So just wanted to say how much we enjoyed our visit to Japan and meeting all the people. And of course, for us, it was an eye-opener, as we say in English. It was a surprise to see how many grown-ups are reading our books, because in the UK, it's only small children who read the books. So it was a unique experience, and we can't wait to be able to travel again and to visit Japan again and meet more of you, the teachers who are using our books. So thank you very much for having us talk to you this morning.
Yes, thank you, Alex. And it's my turn now. So Minasan konbanwa. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for inviting us. We send our best wishes to you all in Japan. And we thank you for your interest in our work, really. And after a long day of presentations that you've had, we hope our talk will both inform and amuse you. But before we start, I also like to express our heartfelt thanks to and admiration of all of you, really, because I'm sure among the audience, among you today, are publishers and educators, lecturers, teachers, writers, whose mission is to educate both young and older people through second language learning, improving their life chances, their knowledge and understanding of other cultures, and by opening the door to them of the global community. So, and I know you're looking forward, of course, to watching Alex do some drawing, and will, of course, entertain you with his wonderful ability to capture images with the magic of his pen. So what we intend to do then is this. I will begin by doing a short presentation about what the Oxford Reading Tree is. It runs quite quickly, but it's got music to it, and I can't take the music out, so I hope you can follow it, but it's quite fun to watch. And it shows how the Oxford Reading Tree, a big literacy program, has made its impact today. I will then just talk briefly about the importance of story and say a little bit about how the Oxford Reading Tree started 35 years ago, quite a long time really. And then Alex and I will talk about how we work together. And I've written a story especially for today, a new story, quite a little one, hasn't been properly written, but it's the outline of a story. I will tell it to Alex, which is what we do when we work together, and he will choose a scene from the story and draw a rough sketch, which will eventually, of course, become the illustration in the story. So if technology works, I will try now to share my screen. Here's where I've got my fingers crossed because I'm not really, here we go. And now here is the first presentation. Well, there we are. That was the presentation. And I'm going to start with my presentation now, which is, I hope, can you all see that? Can everyone see the screen? I hope you can. Well, this is from Little Acorns. It's a saying about how from small things, from small seeds, very big things grow. So it shows the role of the development of the Oxford Reading Tree. I was a teacher for 30 years before I became a professional writer. And if I was asked to write down what was my mission, what were my long-term professional goals, what did I want my students to attain, I came to the conclusion that the most important thing, the key goal, was that I imparted a lifelong love of learning. For example, as an English teacher, my hope would be that my pupils would develop a love of literature and would continue to read with enjoyment and with a critical mind, or they would be able to write and speak correctly with elegance and fluency. But a major factor in learning anything is to want to learn, to see the point of it, to understand the benefits of knowledge brings, to feel a growing sense of confidence as knowledge and understanding develops. So to put it another way, I wanted my students to become confident learners, because confidence allows you to take risks, to explore familiar ground, to make judgments, to take on new ventures, in fact, to never stop learning. And the rewards of all that, of course, are these: success and fulfillment, satisfaction, enjoyment, achievement, progress, understanding, skill, knowledge, and self-worth. So these are the affirming reasons why we learn. They are called, I think they're the outcomes or the objectives or the purpose of what we try and do as educators. So by what methods, by what process, right, the branches, what might it work? If it was a tree, you would need to create the branches for the children to climb it. So what is the process? What are the methods? And I expect you're thinking already, what I hope you're thinking is, of course, one of the most important and effective ways to learn is through story. It's probably one of the key and the most important tools in the learning process. You may have already heard that my son was slow to read at school. He was not making the progress we expected, and he seemed disinterested in his books. They were a word recognition scheme relying on repetition and a method called look and say. And the first books he had were very, very pleasant books, happy scenes from everyday life, like children playing with a kite, running with a dog, helping in the home, etc. But then one day, we got to an exciting page in the book where the barn catches fire and the fire brigade arrived to put it out. And at last in this story, there was some action and some excitement. Finally, a little story to engage him. Now, much to my astonishment, he read the page fluently, without a pause. The following day, I said to my editor at Oxford University Press, "This is what John did last night. He just read so easily, and I didn't think he was very good, but he did." And Mike said, and I said, "If you can motivate the reader, then surely you're halfway there." And Mike, my commissioning editor, the publisher, said, "On that basis, why don't you try and research and write an early reading program based on the premise that stories motivate and engage the reader?" And that was how the Oxford Reading Tree came into being. Now, I did a lot of research, of course, into reading, into the process and what was going on in the United Kingdom at the time. And I wrote some very simple early stories, which seemed to be along the right lines. And this is the very first Oxford Reading Tree, which I constructed in 1984. And I used a whole series of coins, as you can see, to make the diagram. And my initial concept would be there'd be stories at every stage, right from the very beginning. And the whole thing would be constructed to allow children to develop at different speeds, depending on their levels of attainment and their speed of progress. They start together at the beginning, they'd work up the various stories, And as the children developed and progressed at their own pace, in a factor which I think is very important called reading readiness. When they're ready to begin reading, they could branch out. And this metaphor about branching and going up different strands and so on made us wonder, what could we call this reading program? Mike said this diagram looked a bit like a candlestick. Then somebody said, it looks a bit like a tree. And I said, a tree? Wow, a reading tree. And we had, of course, a name for the Oxford Reading Tree. So in brainstorming the kind of stories that we wanted, short, engaging stories, I felt that getting the mood of the story right was to make it, well, obviously enjoyable and or exciting or memorable or charming or having a surprising, a lot of humor, so it was funny. It might be tender, quite a sweet story about a child's feelings and therefore engaging or quite gentle. So every story needed this kind of input, keeping in mind as you write them, how does that impact with the reader? What is the story? What does the story say? And how can it engage them? It took a long time to find the right illustrator for the stories. I spent quite a lot of time meeting illustrators who tried to do roughs and do an illustration of what I had in my mind. And none of the artists I talked to seemed to be able to capture that narrative feel I was hoping for. Although, of course, I enjoyed having expensive lunches on Oxford University Press while I met them and talked to them. And finally, someone at OUP said to me, there's a young artist called Alex Brychta. He's written a book called Wishwat. I looked at Wishwat. This is the book Alex actually had written back in the 1980s. And the characters seemed to me to be exactly the right kind of characters to use for the stories I had in my mind. Alex came to Oxford. We talked about the characters. He drew some examples and he was given the job. If he hadn't written the Oxford Reading Tree, hadn't written the Wishwat, he might never have illustrated the Oxford Reading Tree. These are some of Alex's early images. He won't like me showing you these. I can see him groaning at the screen now. But these were very early ideas. I'll move on quickly. Here's an early version of Kipper. And you can see that over the course of the decades, the stories, both the stories and the illustrations have developed. Here, when we began to plan the reading tree, we decided what the house would look like, what the children would look like, what school they attended, what mum and dad were like, what Gran was like. We discussed all these things. We drew a plan of the area they lived in. So in a sense, the characters came alive in our mind. In fact, nowadays we think that Biff, Chip, Kipper and all their friends are real people. Alex's style, this cartoon style, was exactly what appealed to me. In fact, it was the kind of style which has an impetus to it, a forward movement. If you think back to the pictures I showed you of my son's reading program, those pictures are static. They're captured like a photograph in a moment in time. They can't move either backwards or forwards, or upwards or downwards. But Alex's illustrations, as you see here, due to their cartoon style, and because of, if you see on the screen, the bird flapping its wings or the rope swinging, these illustrations have movement and have narrative and have a forward, onward going, continual story. They are in fact part of the text of the reading tree. So Here was the first reading tree itself in 1986. Well, that was 86 it was started. This is the tree itself. Here's the tree diagram in 1987. Here it is in 1991, growing. Here is Alex and me back in the 1980s, when Alex had a black beard and I had some hair. And here is the reading tree in the 2000s, when there were too many books, in fact, for to go onto a tree diagram. Very, very quickly then, to move on to the importance of stories. Well, I think stories, as I say, are very important because students form a connection with a story. It allows them to develop their imagination and their creativity. It becomes a model for their learning process and for their thought patterns. Stories help in learning because they create meaningful content. You can present information as a story. You can do mathematics or physics or science, certainly history, any subject as a story with a beginning, a middle, and an end. A beginning setting the challenge, a middle set the challenge, and an ending of the new reality. It's helpful in many, many situations. Stories can transport learners into an adventurous world, away from their environment, and so it opens the mind. Stories pass on knowledge. When information is embedded in the content of a story, it's transferred to the listener in a unique way. So that's mainly my presentation. Alex can chime in now, because that's the bit I wanted to get across about the importance of story, how we started, and now how Alex and Rod work together, our 36-year partnership. Well, how do I start writing a story? I imagine the whole thing from beginning to end. And for me, working hard is me sitting back in my armchair like this with my cup of coffee or my glass of mine, a glass of water. And here I'm working really hard, visualizing the story. I try to imagine the whole story from beginning to end. The work is done really by trying to work out the story itself and trying to visualize how you might begin it, have a middle, and have an ending. Once I've got that, I then write the story itself, the text of the story. I also write what I see in my mind's eye. I write, in fact, the art brief or the storyboard to give to Alex. When I've done that, it goes then, oh gosh, sorry. It goes to my editor. Here it is, look for a comment. And all my stories are sent to literary experts and schools for commenting and trialing. And at this stage, I make any changes to the text of the story itself. There might be an element of political incorrectness in it, and we give the story its final edit. And then we go to Oxford. Alex comes from his house, I go to Oxford from mine. We meet the editor and a designer. And Alex will explain this process in more detail, but then we draw the rough sketches for the finished book. And here's a rough sketch that Alex has drawn of the picture above, as you can see. And here's Alex doing a sketch with a designer called Francesca. Next to her somewhere is the editor, which will be Hannah, and myself at this process at Oxford, designing the visual side of the book. We have jokes, and sometimes Alex plays a joke on me. We once asked ourselves, what would it be like when Biff and Chip were 40 and Mum was 60? And I like to do this picture of Mum when she was quite elderly. So Alex then goes home and draws the colours in the artwork of the books. So I think I'll talk about why they're called Biff, Chip and Kipper after the illustration, I'll explain about the vocabulary and syntax and the controlled vocabulary later on. But I think it's time now for Alex to come in. And I'm going to tell you a story, or read this story, which is, well, I'll tell it to you. It's about Kipper, who wants to have a new bike. Kipper's grown out of his old bike, but now he can ride a bike properly. He thinks it's time to have a new bike. And he's seen this BMX bike on the internet, although it's too expensive. And he starts to pester Dad and Mum, who say he can have a new bike, but a cheaper model. We don't have a money tree, says Dad, in the garden. We can't afford this particular bike. Thinks Kipper. If we did have a money tree, we could afford it. So Kipper decides to plant a money tree. He puts all his pocket money in a spare piece of ground in the flower bed, hoping it will grow into a money tree. And the family wonder why Kipper keeps returning to the flower bed and watering the patch of earth day after day. Biff makes Kipper tell her what he is doing and reports back to Mum and Dad. We can't just tell him a money tree won't appear, said Biff. So the twins hatch a plot with Mum and Dad's help. The family watch from afar as Kipper goes into the garden, and his surprise, there is a tree, well, a big branch and pushed into the ground, really, where he planted the money. And hanging on the branch are little packets and little parcels. He can't believe his eyes. In the packets are a few coins and the big parcel's a money box. There's no such thing as a money tree, says Chip. We've given you some of our pocket money to save up and put money in, adds Biff. If you help do the chores without grumbling, says Mum, Dad and I will give you some pocket money. You can put it in the money box and save it up. And I will buy you a new bike, says Dad, and the extra money you save will go towards the expensive bike you really want. Okay, so Alex.
It's my turn to get to work, yes.
To work. So Alex, we'll try, I don't know what you want to choose. I did the bit in blue at the top. Do you want to draw that scene?
Yes, I will, but I think before I do that, I have a little sequence here, which will illustrate clearly, because I can't do the whole process of creating an illustration here. So before I start to show you how I would illustrate one of the pages of the new story that Rod has just read to you, I'll show you here what the actual process looks like. Some of you may be familiar with it, and I will just switch to my other camera here. Hold on a second, and that should show my desk here, and I'll put some light on it. Now this, if you can see it, is, I'll just try and focus it a little better. Hold on one second. It's not a very good camera, but this is the initial sketch which I would do when Rod and I are working together in Oxford with the editor and with the designer. And because the story comes first, when we meet up, the editors at OUP have already provided me with a layout of the page and the text. The text is already in place, although as you can see, sometimes we make changes, last minute changes to the text when we are working on it. So this particular story is, I think it's from a book called The Real Floppy. I couldn't actually find the book here in my studio, but this would be the very first sketch for pages 10 and 11. And you can see it's quite rough. It's It's done with sometimes with a pencil, sometimes with a pen. And the idea is to show Rod and the editor what I see as the finished picture is going to look like. And then sometimes I do 2 or 3 versions if you know, for some reason we're not happy with it. And if once all these pictures are finished, and it sometimes takes a day to create a book in this rough form, it's called a dummy. So we create a dummy of the book. I then go back to my studio, and from this picture, the next stage would be to create a full-size rough. So this is larger. This is the actual size that the picture is going to be, the illustration. And I play around with the layout of the people, because, for instance, you'll see in the initial sketch, I couldn't quite fit both the children here. So I've got Biff. This would be Kipper, Wilma, and that's Biff and Chip, or Biff and Chip, of course. And they're on a beach, and there's a sign here. So once I'm happy with the layout, I will then create a line drawing, so an outline of the. This is a double-page spread. It's 2 pages of the book. And this is where I must make sure that everything is exactly in the right place as it should be. And once I have the outline, I don't color the outline itself, because sometimes it's useful to have the actual outline preserved in case I need to change the colors or do something else with it. So I will actually print this, copy it, and onto a different piece of paper, and that's what I color. And here is the colored version of that illustration. And this is what I don't know why I see. Sorry, my camera is shaking a little bit. So this is the final version of the illustration, which is going to be scanned. I have a professional scanner in my studio, and I scan the picture. I print out a proof, which is a color corrected print that shows me exactly what the printed book is going to be like, so that I can see what the colors are going to look like. And also the publishers need to see that, because the books are printed abroad. So they need to see when the books come back to the UK, they want to see what the colors are going to look like. So the proof then goes to Oxford, but the artwork stays with me. So that's the whole process. And let's get back to Rod's story. So I'm going to try and fit this into to work out the size of the screen at the moment, so you can see it all. So that's about where's the so okay, so this is roughly the area that I've got to work with today. So of course we haven't got the text here, so we assume that perhaps text is going to be here, and maybe up here. This is always important, so that I've got an idea of how the picture is going to flow around the text. And you may remember when Rod showed you the picture of the very old artwork of the rope swing, that there was a tree, and then there was a strange white shape that cut into the tree, and that was simply because that's where the text was going to go. So I think if I choose the scene where Kipper has come out for the first time to see the money tree growing in the garden, I would probably see it in this way. I think maybe Rod, can you remind me the money tree? What kind of thing did the parents hang the little pouches with coins on?
We found the
Would it-
branch, a big branch of a tree, about, I suppose, 2.5 meters tall, maybe, or 2 meters.
Okay, well, we'll make it a little smaller here. So if I stick a branch into, so here's, maybe this is the flower bed here. So that would be grass, and this is just soil. And the branch is stuck into the soil like that.
Yes, I saw it. Hard. I thought it had leaves on it. It was quite a leafy branch, I thought.
So it's got leaves on it as well. So
Yeah.
I'll just sketch those in. But crucially, it has little bags.
Little bags,
What do you
about-
think? They're like little bags of coins.
They're wrapped in paper, tissue paper, coloured tissue paper, red and green, blue.
Okay, so
Coins in each one. Quite small, really, quite small, with bits of cotton.
yeah, so little pouches of money.
Yeah, smaller, I think, than that, though.
Well, if I do it smaller, then I think our audience may not be able to see it clearly. But
There's lots of
this
money
is
in that.
this is exactly the kind of thing we discuss when Rod and I are working on something. So if Rod told me to do it smaller, I would then say, okay, so ignore the big ones here. I'll do them small like this, and then I just carry on, and we talk about what the rest of the picture is going to be. So here I'm going to draw Kipper, and again I draw it at this stage. I would be drawing quite quickly, and I'm not concerned about the quality of the picture. The main important thing here is to get the layout correctly and to show roughly what the illustration is going to look like. So I'll start with Kipper looking surprised. Because he did not expect to see a real money tree in the garden. And of course, he's got his striped shirt on like that. And I always think it's nice to have Floppy in the picture as well. So Floppy could be running to see what's going on, perhaps just here. And then in the background, I think we would see the family looking in from the back of the house into the garden to see what Kipper is doing, looking at the money tree. So I think I'd probably
From a window, you think, or would they be outside? Maybe they'd be outside, would they? Behind a wall or a sheet or something?
Yeah, they could be outside. I think maybe Biff and Chip would be outside.
Just
So
peeping around the corner or something, yeah.
so there's Biff. And there's Chip. again, not bothered with detail here. So it's just really to establish where everything's going to be in the picture. And maybe that's the back door of the house like this. So they've just come out. And then there could be the kitchen window is, I think, about there. And perhaps mum could be with her earrings, of course. She could be looking to see what's going on. And so this is really the kind of thing that I would be doing initially to establish what the picture is going to look like. And then the next stage will be, I'll just do a little bit to show you what the next stage would be. I come home and actually the outline is done on very thin paper, because I don't know if you can see that, but I can see the picture through this. And I'll use a slightly thicker pen here than I normally would, so you can see it clearly. But the next stage would be to draw see, I'd make little corrections as I go along, because I think I've just knocked one of Kipper's teeth out. So I don't draw exactly what I see in the sketch, but I'll correct it a little bit as I go along.
Well, if I can come in here, Alex, then explain something about the story
Of
process.
course, yeah.
Because what I do when I write a story is I ask myself this question: whose story is it? When you write stories, you need to ask who is the story about. What's that person's, who is the story about? Whose story is it? What is their issue? What's their challenge? What's their circumstance? How can they resolve it? How will it be resolved? Or how will it play out? And what will be the result at the end? What will be resolved? So in this particular story, obviously, it's Kipper's challenge. He wants a new bike. How will it be resolved? Well, of course, the family come in and help him, and he has to save his money, of course, to buy the bike he wants in the end. So that element of thinking whose story is it's very important. Otherwise, your writing can become too loose. To keep the control of your writing, you need to have the sort of discipline and the forward pattern of the story. The other thing you have to do as a writer, particularly with writing for small children, is to be the child yourself. You have to write as the reader. So two important elements, if any of you want to write stories, whose story is it? What's the challenge or what's the issue? How will it resolve itself? How will it be overcome? How will it finish? And then from whose point of view am I writing this? I must become the reader. We've got about 20 minutes left, Alex. So
yeah, we don't want to miss our chance to answer some questions. So I'll just, I won't finish the whole tree, but this will just show how much more detail will go into the actual illustration. So here I would actually do the bags of money a little smaller than in the initial sketch. And so this is the kind of thing that I would end up with, and that of course then gets printed, as I explained, on a different paper and colored. So that's the process. I'll just switch myself onto the picture again.
One of the questions I was asked, or we were asked, is why are they called Biff, Chip and Kipper? Why do we create these strange names for them? Well, there's a reason why they're called Biff, Chip and Kipper. Kipper, when he was very tiny, he was in fact called Christopher, and he couldn't say his name properly. His baby talk, he pronounced his name Kipper rather than Christopher. And the family thought it was very cute, so they decided to call him Kipper for fun, really, and the name stuck. And then Elizabeth, Beth, became Biff, and for some reason, which no one quite knows, David Javid, who is Chip, became Chip. And I chose to have these made-up names for the children so that no child reader would have the same name as the characters in the stories they were reading. I wanted to keep them quite separate. So these rather strange names were a kind of device I used to have my children have totally unique names, in fact. Hence Biff, Chip and Kipper. Another important thing was, do I control the vocabulary and the syntax in my stories? Very much so. Now, for the first up until about 2005, I wrote stories which were based upon the text having a story in it which the children would read by using picture cues, by guessing, by having all kinds of various cues. It was it's called the psycholinguistic guessing game, to quote Ken Goodman, a famous literacy guru. And the very early stories were what you see in the illustration, you read in the text. So Alex's illustrations are a form of text. And the very early stuff, what was going on in the picture was the same as the text. Kipper went on, or was on there's a picture of Kipper on a swing. There's a picture of him on the swing. And so what you see, you say. And that meant the syntax was also helpful. You had the name of the character, then the verb, a subject and predicate, or subject, verb, object. So there was an onward thrust. That was the way the reading tree was started, with a kind of a top-down approach. Story came first. You got the idea of the story, you enjoyed it, then you read it and you guessed at it, you practiced it, you kept repeating it, and gradually the story became embedded and you were able to read it. In 2005 or so, the UK government felt that phonics, a phonic approach, was the one to go forward. So they asked schools to use phonics in a way for children to learn the 44 phonemes, or the sounds, the letter sounds, the sound symbol correspondences of the letters. For example, EA makes E, ch. It's got the vowel digraph EA, and or a phoneme. So each makes each. So again, AI makes sound AI. So there are these 44 sounds, and so that's how the children now learn through a phonic approach. And I thought then the reading tree perhaps would have to stop, because I was using a different sort of approach. But because of the power of stories, then I simply switched the text to accommodate a phonic approach to it quite differently. So there are, in a sense, two approaches to reading tree, an early one and a much later one. Alex, we also asked any interesting tricks or surprises, such as glasses, eyes, or stuffed animals and things in your stories.
Well, I would like to mention one thing which may amuse our audience today, and that is Rod explained earlier on that throughout the 35 years that we've worked together, we've had a lot of fun, and sometimes it goes a little bit too far, in my opinion, because there was a time when Rod said to me many years ago, Alex, you seem to be able to draw just about everything from memory. There must be something you find difficult to draw. And I sort of thought about it for a little while, and I said, actually, yes, there is. I don't like drawing bicycles. I find them difficult. And Rod said, "Oh, why is that?" And I said, "Well, I can show you because when I try and draw a bicycle, let me just switch over to my other
There's a
camera.
bicycle story to show the audience."
So I said to Rod, "Well, look, bikes are difficult because first of all, you have to draw 2 wheels, and those wheels have to be exactly round, and I can never get them quite round, and it drives me mad because I don't like to use a compass or some sort of template. So it's difficult to get them round the first time. So I sometimes spend, several hours drawing the wheels until I'm happy with them. And then once I'm happy with them, you have to work out how the bike fits together. So there's the front fork, holds the front wheel, and then there's the frame of the bicycle, so which looks something like this on most bikes. And then there's a bit that holds the rear wheel like this. And then there's the pedals go there. And of course, if I'm drawing this for children in schools, when I visit schools, I say, okay, and now, so that's the rear wheel. Now the saddle goes up here, doesn't it? And all the children shout, "No, no, 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 that's not where the saddle goes." "Oh, the saddle goes, where does the saddle go? There?" "No, no, no." And then I say, "Oh, I know, it goes there." And then the handlebars, of course, go there like that. And there's the chain. And then which way do the spokes on the wheels go? Do they go this way or do they go this way? And the children go the first way. And I say, "Well, like this." "No, no, 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 the other way." I say, but if the bike is moving fast, you don't see the spokes. You see these little lines like that, flashing light. And there's your bike, you see. So I said to Rod, this is, it's a bit of a pain to try and get the bicycle right. So I don't like drawing bicycles. And what do you think Rod did when he heard me say that? Anyone want to guess? You're all muted. You're all muted, but go on, tell him, Rod.
About bicycles.
Yes, he did. He wrote a story, and I think on every page of that book there were several bicycles. But anyway, so this was, we're going to run out of time, so I'm going to switch back to, I'm just going to draw Floppy on the bike, because somebody's got to be riding this bike, right?
Well, you can see how lucky I am as a writer to have an illustrator who can capture the images in my mind, like Alex can, really. I sometimes even dream Brychta. I dream in his visuals. I dream the characters in my mind's eye. Just I wanted to make one more point about magic key adventures, because they're an important aspect of the Oxford Reading Tree. And the magic key, of course, which takes them into a little house in Biff's bedroom, is really a metaphor for the children's imagination. It's a play metaphor. But as the writer, it allows me, and it allows Alex as the illustrator, to create a wonderfully vibrant story in perfect safety, because the magic key will always bring them back into Biff's bedroom. And it's the range and scope of the Oxford Reading Tree has always been because of the vast number of stories you can tell using the magic key, a form of fantasy. And just to make one point about the magic key very quickly, time moves like this, say. Supposing this is, on this is 1200 hours, and this end is 1400 hours, and I'm going to move from 12 to 1400 hours. If at, say, 12:30, there's this tiny loop in time, the characters go through here into the loop and come out again. So a magic key adventure takes place not in real time, but a loop. that takes them back into the time at the same time that they went in. So if mum calls them to go downstairs and have their tea, they can have a magic key adventure and come out even before she's finished calling them, because it takes place within within a millisecond really, but they go into the time loop and come out again exactly the same time they went in, or a second or so later. Alex, any more questions you wanted to ask us? You've drawn.
Yes, Atsuko, yes, there were going to be some questions that I believe Rod and I will be asked, and I want to make sure we have time to answer them.
I've answered most of the ones.
魚住さん今からなんか質
Yes,
問
yes,
あ
yes,
み
yes.
んなに
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, thank you, Rod-san and Alex-san. Thank you very much for your wonderful, impressive talk with interesting episodes. It's even a privilege that we could really see how a story is made and how a picture is drawn. It was really impressive. Okay, so okay, yeah, now yes, we have
質問があったら
questions. Yes, yes,
いやフローから
we
質
have
問があ
some
ったら
questions. Yes. Okay, is there any question to ask Rod-san and Alex-san? You can simply turn off your mute and ask directly to them. Any question, or you've got yes, there are a lot of comments on chats. Okay, then let me ask you, can I?
Did I see Yuko Suzuki put her hand up?
Yes, I
Sorry.
put up a question. If there's no one asking, I have a very quick question because thank you so much, Alex and Rod, for showing us such an amazing process. It was really, I knew the story, how you make it, because I heard your story when you came to Japan before, but you know, in front of me, watching what you do was really moved my heart. I mean, it came to my heart. And I have a question. After you come back home from the meeting, you draw so quickly and you draw so perfectly. So I wondered if you revise them after you come back. I mean, it's so, the drawings are so good. So I don't want to waste it if I'm an editor. So I just thought, how many times you revise it after the meeting? How long does it take?
That's a good question. And sometimes when people see me draw, they say, wow, you must finish a book in a couple of days, so quickly. But of course, the kind of pictures that I sketch here very quickly would not be good enough to go into a book. Although sometimes when there's a thing about when you first draw a picture and it can be kind of sketchy, but then if you try and do a finished version of it, which is what I always do, sometimes there's a term in English called laboring something. If you labor it, it actually doesn't look as vibrant and as good as the original sketch. And this is something that has always bothered me, because I do sometimes labor the finished illustration, and then I look at the sketch and I think, oh, I wish I could just use the sketch. But the publishers would tell me, no, we can't do that, because there's an established style now. And if suddenly there was a sketchy illustration, which may be more lively and vibrant than the finished illustration, it would look out of place. So I try and maintain a certain sort of liveliness to the pictures, even when I'm carefully redrawing the outline. And but to answer your question, people often ask me, how long does it take you to illustrate a book? And there's another English term, which is, well, how long is a piece of string? Because it depends. Sometimes if a book is quite simple and there aren't too many things in the background and there aren't too many characters to illustrate, it might be just Biff and Chip in the garden, then on, you know, if everything goes well, I think the shortest I've ever managed to illustrate a book in was probably about a week. And of course, some books have 8 pages, some have 16 pages, some have 30, 24, 32. They always go in multiples of 8. So a 32-page book is going to take me perhaps, you know, 3 weeks. I think the longest I've ever spent on a book was a month, if there's something quite complicated to illustrate. But
in my case, when I write a book, you'd be interested to hear the short books, the books with fewer words, take me longer to write. The books, a book with 2,000 words, I can do quicker than a book with 25 words or 24 words. So the simpler they are, the harder they are to write.
Yes,
you're much more exposed. When you have a very, very little text, you're much more exposed. In the story and the way it moves is much easier to get wrong, really.
Yeah, my problem has always been that you know, Oxford University Press, the publishers, give me a deadline. So we will work on a book. I'll do the sketches, and then they'll say, "Okay, can we have the book in 2 weeks' time?" And I'll say, "Yeah, I reckon I can do that." So I work to a deadline, and if I meet the deadline, manage to finish the book, they will assume that every book that I illustrate can be done in 2 weeks. But of course, they don't realize that for those 2 weeks, in trying to meet the deadline, I was working every day until 1 or 2 in the morning, and I was working weekends. And then they just automatically think, yeah, he can do it in 2 weeks. So that's what we give him for every book. And of course, there have been times when, you know, I get completely burnt out because I work for, you know, 2 or 3 months non-stop because I've got several books. Normally the books are published in batches of 6. So if I've got 6 books of 24 pages to do, you know, they usually go one after the other really quickly. And so that's a bit of a problem. But again, it depends on the kind of book and the complexity of it, how long it takes to do that.
Well, the key thing is, though, even though I know it's really hard work for you, you work much harder than I do, much longer hours, of course, but it's so enjoyable, Alex. It's such great fun, isn't it? We've had huge fun.
Oh, absolutely, yes. I mean,
wonderful career to have for both of us, really, to create these characters and to construct the world of Biff, Chip and Kipper, the innocent, sweet, innocent world they live in.
Yeah. And as Rod said earlier at the beginning of the session, you know, we have been working so closely on this project for so many years that what we now call it the world of Reading Tree is actually in our minds. So, you know, if Rod says, you know, Biff and Chip are in the hallway by the front door, they're just about to go out, then we can both see exactly what is around them. And the interesting thing is that, you know, I'm quite a lazy illustrator. I don't like referring back to old books that I've done, but most of that stuff is in my head. So when I, for instance, draw the children in the living room, if you were to go through all the books, you will find that the living room is never exactly the same in each book. You know, I just kind of remember the basics of it, and then I draw it as I remember it, but it's a little different than the last time I drew it. And the amusing and interesting thing is that actually it doesn't matter at all, because as long as children who read the books recognize that that is the interior of Biff, Chip and Kipper's house, it doesn't matter if it looks a little different. You know, maybe they bought a new sofa, maybe they bought a new picture to put on the wall, maybe they redecorate it so the wall is a slightly different color, but it's still the same house, and that's the important thing.
Well, Alex, I think our time may be up, and they'll be too polite to say we're going over our time, but it's been an enormous privilege to come to your conference and present to you. Thank you very much indeed for having us, really. We've been thrilled to explain what we do. It's been great fun, as always, it always is. And so from my point of view, here in England, North Norfolk, where it's been snowing, thank you for having us. Thank you very much indeed.
Yeah,
Absolutely. It's been a great honor. Yes, thank you very much for staying through this session, listening to us drone on.
For sticking with it. Yeah, well done.
yeah, thank you
Thank
very
you
much.
so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank
you
for
very much.
everybody here.
You're all very welcome.
Thank you.
And there are some interesting questions on the chat, so maybe you can answer them later, or yes. But yeah, thank you very much coming all the way from UK. Yes.
You're welcome, Yoko. I have to say, I've only had a quick look at the chat. I'll have a look through them, and if I can answer something that's specific to me, then I'll just type it into the chat. Is that okay? But the other question is the session at your end over now? Because I don't want to be answering questions which will end up in in the ether, because there's nobody at the other end.
Yes. I I don't know. Maybe the audience are interested in your answers, all of them. Could you quickly answer some questions if you don't mind?
I don't mind. I have nowhere to go at the moment. I'm happy to stay on for a little longer.
That'd be great. For example, there's one question on authenticity. That's the one, but from Yoshikawa-san. Can you read the one? How have you emphasized on authenticity when you make stories? How have you faced authenticity when you make
authenticity? I think that's probably a question for Rod, and that's a lot of the stories are based on your own experiences with your children, Rod. Okay.
Yes, I constantly I'm watching out with my now of course grandchildren for an idea for a story. So what happens as a writer? You become attuned to looking at situations, and anything might give you a little hint which you could use in a story. So you are constantly on the lookout. You have like little antennae in your brain which is searching for a story. As for I don't know if you mean integrity or authenticity. If it's to do with integrity, then I don't like any situation which is totally unbelievable. I like to write, even the Magic Key Adventures have to have a sort of basis of logic behind them. And you can't just have the Magic Key solving problems. A lot of the stories are problem solving stories in the Magic Key Adventures. And I wouldn't want just to have the Magic Key solve the riddle or get them out of trouble. What's interesting about the Magic Key Adventures is that children have to rely on their own resources. And so my job as a writer is to think of a situation which can be resolved. And that's quite a tricky thing to do, because you have to work out a situation, a predicament in which the children are trapped or have to get themselves out of or solve. And you have to work out in your own mind, how could it be solved? And what would be a logical way to do it? So that, from that point of view, then, the integrity of the Magic Adventures and also the world in which the children live is very important. It's a microcosmic world. It's a little world of its own. And I did try and write some stories once where there was stranger danger and internet danger for children. And that kind of social problem doesn't work in the Oxford Reading Tree. I was very uncomfortable, and the stories never got published. But to have Biff and Chip meeting internet danger somehow brings into the stories an element which I don't like very much. It's like an octopus's ink in the clear water. It stains it. So I like to keep the Reading Tree world rather pure and innocent and tender and sweet, really, because that's what gives it its lasting appeal. And that must be the case because some of the stories written in 1986 and 7 and so on are still quite popular.
Okay.
I'm just reading through the chat now, so thank you very much to all of you who posted lovely comments. There is one question, however, that I should answer, and that is that in the story Holiday in Japan, I painted Mount Fuji in green, and it says here, nobody paints Mount Fuji green. We usually paint it in blue. Why did you paint it in green? Well, to be honest, I have no idea what color it is, because when Rod and I went on the Shinkansen past Mount Fuji from Tokyo to Osaka, our dear friend Koichi, who was with us, said, if you look to your right, you will see Mount Fuji. And all we saw was gray clouds, and there was a little bit sort of that was revealed between the clouds and the fog below, and that was gray. So it was a very gray day, and but I assumed that Mount Fuji, apart from the snow peak at the top, has probably trees growing on its side. So I automatically assumed that Mount Fuji. But on the other hand, I have here a present, which I will just bring over. It's hanging on my studio wall. And yes, indeed, there's a picture of Mount Fuji, and this looks rather blue. And I just wonder, yeah, that's blue, that's blue, that's blue. I clearly got it wrong, so apologies for that. Well, as you can see, some green there, but the foothills of Mount Fuji always seem to be blue. So I'll just have to come back to Japan and see it in real life without fog and without clouds, and make sure.
On my sofa. Yes. One of the questions is it floppy in my living room? Yes, it is. Yes. Thank you for the lovely comments. They're wonderful, aren't they? I love them. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Rod-san, and thank you, Alex-san. Yes, please give them the warmest applause. Yes, to their interesting talk. Yeah, thank you very much. And you can say, you and other audience, if you you don't mind staying a little bit longer, Rod-san, Alex-san? Yeah, you don't mind?
I don't mind.
Thank you, thank you. This meeting room is open for a little while, but let us close the seminar first, and then some of you may come back if you talk to Rod and Alex later. But please let us close the seminar first. ではひとまず、本セミナーは閉会とさせていただきますが。Kindly, Rod-san and Alex-san will stay a little bit longer. So if you have any questions or comments or something, please feel free. Feel free, yes, to talk to them. Thank you very much.
I saw Hiroko Moroki has a question, but you're muted.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much for your great presentation.
You're very welcome.
We had a more splendid experience, which we could see you drawing a picture. Thank you very much.
I'm glad you enjoyed it.
Yes, of course.
Where in Japan are you based, Hiroko?
Yeah. I live in Osaka Prefecture.
Okay.
Yeah, and about 7 years ago, when you came to Japan, I attended your seminar in
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and you and your wife and Lodo-san had a dinner together.
That's right.
Yeah,
That's right. Yes, I
yeah.
remember that was a lovely, lovely
Yes.
day. Yeah, yeah.
Thank you very much. Yeah, of course, I put your as autographs and illustration on the wall of my school. And my students love reading the Oxford Reading Tree, of course.
Yeah, we had a lovely time in Japan.
Yes.
Does anyone have any other questions?
Question. I'm Erika Miyamoto, and thank you very much for answering my question. I was wondering, why you painted Mount Fuji green for a long time, and I'm so happy to have an answer from you. And I had also dinner with you several years ago when you came to Japan, and I was so happy to meet you again.
Oh, well, it's lovely to see you. And yes, I hope that there will be other stories for me to illustrate with Mount Fuji, and then I can get it right next time.
No. It was interesting. And I introduced that book to the student, How Foreigners See Japanese Culture and Japanese People. It's a very, very good book. And thank you very much.
Yeah.
Excuse me, can I have just one question?
Yes, Makoto.
My name is Makoto. Thank you very much for the wonderful presentation. Maybe this question is to Rod-san. I was just wondering how you...
I'm afraid he seems to have popped out for a minute. I can
I see.
I can see his chair is empty. Well,
yeah, I was just wondering how he or you named those
there he is.
characters.
Sorry.
Oh yeah. I was wondering if there's any connection between the ethnicities of the characters if you name them, when you name them, like Wilma, Wilf, and even the animals' names. I was just wondering if those names are kind of a standard name for ordinary naming.
No, they're not, in fact. And
No.
Nina, what I thought, Nina is, in fact, Nina Patel, she is a Hindu girl, but not a Muslim girl. And I was going to, I got a bit of a muddle with the names. Back in 1985, I chose these names because they were unusual names, but they weren't chosen for their ethnicity. No. If I was doing it now, then I would do, yes. I would have different names. And Nadim is, of course, a Muslim boy, and that is, of course, a correct name for him. But nowadays it would be a different story because people are much more concerned with getting that aspect right. Once I'd named them and once the books were printed up, I couldn't change it. So it was that was the problem.
So it's basically ethnicity free.
It is really, yes. But the Afro-Caribbean extraction, Wilf and Wilma, Nina is a Hindu girl, and she's called Nina Patel, and Nadim is a Muslim boy.
I think there's also an aspect, Rod, that because the books are now all over the world, we have tried to have stories which include all nationalities and all colors of people. We have Japanese people in the books, we have Chinese, we have Korean, we have Caribbean, we have Indian and Pakistani, and so we try and make sure that wherever the books are read, that we're going to have some friends, who are going to say, yes, we are represented in the books.
Right. So all those things are kind of neutral. It can go.
Supposedly, yes.
Yeah.
Because that's why you change. Oh, sorry.
Go on.
You changed hot dog to hamburger. Is that right? The hot dog. Originally, it was a hot dog, and in one storybook, it was a hot dog, and then you changed it to hamburger. Right?
Barbecue.
Barbecue. No, yeah, the story barbecue. Yeah.
Yes.
original CD says hot dog.
Yes, I tell you why that is, because there's a lot of things that I've illustrated in the books over the last 35 years, which were okay 35, 30, 25 years ago, 20 years ago even. But because of the political correctness and the changing attitudes in the world, those things are no longer acceptable now. So, and because, for instance, our books are sold in the Middle East, where, you know, there are a lot of Muslim children reading them, I'm not allowed to draw a sausage in any of my illustrations. And of course, in the old books, there were sausages, there were hot dogs, you know, on the barbecue. And then at some point, some editor said, this is not acceptable because these books are going to be sold in, you know, Saudi Arabia. So we have to take the sausages out. And I always try and come up with some excuse. I say, but the sausages are made with halal meat. And they say, no, because nobody will know that for sure. So these things have to be changed. And every year there is something that I have to change or take out of the illustrations that's been there for years, because suddenly it is not acceptable. So yes, sausages sometimes are deleted from books. Yeah.
I see.
For example, the rope swing story, which I showed you an early illustration of, would never get through nowadays. It would never be published, because the elements, there are two elements. One is political correctness in stories, and also the changing nature of relationships. The woke, it's called the woke mentality now. The transgender, same-sex marriages, that kind of political agenda really has to be addressed, I think, in publishing.
And Rod, also health and safety.
I was going to say the other thing is the health and safety aspect,
Yeah.
which unfortunately slapstick things like a pot of paint falling from a ladder onto someone's head, which was quite a funny image, would never ever get past the publishers nowadays, because it would be frowned upon. And the problem is, of course, that with social media and with various platforms in which people can make comments, publishers quite rightly are very wary, very cautious of anything which might be found to be disturbing. Because, of course, once you get a comment about a story on a social platform, there's one called Mumsnet, about very vociferous mothers. If they found something they didn't like, it could become quite a viral, quite a huge protest, which would be very bad for the publisher. So there's a lot of care taken now about political correctness and health and safety. I would like to see a single parent family in my stories. So I didn't get one in the end, but it would have been, perhaps nowadays I should bring them in. And disabled child as well. There is a disabled child, but he doesn't feature very much. So I agree. I think that stories where for small children do need to reflect the society in which they live. But then, of course, that is, as Alex says, it's an issue for global publishing, because not all cultural mores or cultural beliefs and behaviors are universal. So you might have problems in a country in which doesn't have those beliefs or that social pattern. So it's interesting, a very interesting one about how far. The other interesting thing is that our stories are very set in the United Kingdom, very UK based, and the images and the houses they live in, chimney pots on them, and churches and telephone kiosks and all the sort of elements of UK, England, particularly English life, are in the stories. And I say, well, what's important is not so much the setting in which these stories take place, because a fairy story has castles and has enchanted forests and has strange characters. What's important is the story. So the background to the story, the very English background, is irrelevant if the children enjoy the story. And this is why I think that the human situations, Kipper getting into trouble, or the interpersonal relationships between the characters, the family dynamic, is what gives them their appeal, not the setting in which the stories take place. So I'm not concerned that we have very English stories, really.
Are you still actively collaborating on stories?
Well, we haven't been during COVID. We haven't been, because we seem to have got to a point where we did a lot of work in 2019. We did a big project together, and since October 2019, we haven't done anything, have we, Alex? I don't think.
No. Yeah, it's been difficult everywhere in the world. I'm just looking at the chat again. There's one question which is quite interesting. Thank you for talking about political correctness. I've heard Chinese adventure is not included in ORT China. Are there any political correctness problems for the Chinese? Well, China is an interesting sort of point for us, because we've actually had to illustrate or create a few stories specifically for China, and in order to get everything right about those books, Rod and I actually went to China and went to Shanghai and did a lot of research. Now, if I could have done that kind of research in Japan, I would have got the color of Mount Fuji correctly, but we did not stop to look at Mount Fuji in good weather. But yes, sometimes it is important to do a lot of research to make sure that we get things right. And I'm not sure about this particular question. I wasn't aware that Chinese adventure is not included in ORT China, but maybe that was done some years ago, and all my research, in fact, that book was probably illustrated and written before we had the internet. I think it's quite an old story. So, today there's an excellent possibility of doing a lot of research on the internet. If I have to draw something that I'm not sure how it looks, I'll do a Google image search and I'll get 100 different pictures of whatever it is I need to see. In those days, it was a matter of going to the library or a bookshop and trying to find a book on that specific subject. And it was very time consuming, and often I would try and cheat things a little bit by making it up or just using my imagination. And maybe there was something in the Chinese adventure that the Chinese didn't like, which is perhaps why it's not included in their list.
Well, another example, we did the Japanese holiday in Japan, and then I did a story about Kipper and the samurai, I think, didn't I?
Yeah.
And I wanted to write a story about it's Nijo Castle in Kyoto, has this nightingale floor which squeaks and creaks.
Yeah.
And I was desperate to bring in this squeaky floor into the story, but I simply could not think of a way to do it. But that was an example of having come to your beautiful country, to Japan. I was able to write that particular story because I had in my mind the images of that place. And Alex illustrated the grounds of the castle authentically. So that was the answer to the authentic question that I was asked just now. Wherever we can, we try to get, we did a story about a Japanese adventure. We would try and get authenticity. It would look right. It wouldn't be made up. And I think the first Chinese adventure was rather fantastical and made up. The ones we did for China were very much based upon on what we discovered and researched while we were there.
Yeah, there's a good point Rod's made about the some of the stories. Of course, which take place in a magic adventure, there's a little bit more liberty we can take with what goes on there. I remember there was an early story which in which the children go back in time to the time of was the Cavaliers and the Roundheads. Which century would that be, Rod? Probably the 1500s, 1700s. And I was having a little bit of fun, and in the background, in one of or two of the pictures, I put a sort of a New York, like a Manhattan skyline of skyscrapers, and of course it was a joke, but I got letters from children who said, "You got it wrong. There were no skyscrapers in the 1700s. You know, when there was these conflicts going on between these armies." And so I remember writing back again, never wanting to admit a mistake. And it wasn't a mistake, it was deliberate at that time. But I said, well, I don't know if you noticed, but actually it was a magic adventure that the children were in. And magic, anything goes. so that's how I got out of it.
Another example of authenticity was, do you know Paris Adventure?
Yeah.
When the children go back to try to find the Eiffel Tower,
Yeah.
and they find it hasn't yet been built. It was built, of course, for the 1888 Paris exhibition. And so my story was about them discovering a competition for the Eiffel Tower, which was a beacon, which is a light on top of a stand, I think called a beacon, which has a light on the top and a tapering construction, which of course invented by Professor Trifle, I called him in my mind. Anyways, I wrote the story. When it was plugged in, it blew up, and Biff said, if you turn it upside down, the shape of the flambeau or the torch, the Eiffel Tower. Well, I got a very, very angry letter from a mum who said that was disgraceful, that I should have played with history. There could not have been electricity in those days. How dare I try and fool the children by having electricity? But in fact, I had actually researched it very, very carefully. And there was arc lighting in the Parisian streets from about 1879 through to 1888, when which the story takes place. And even a little plug was invented by a company similar to the one which we put in. So all the elements of that story, even though it was a fantastical story, complete spoof on the Eiffel Tower, was carefully researched, so that this kind of thing wasn't, we didn't take liberties, in fact, with history. Alex can make a joke in a Magic Key adventure because it is a Magic Key adventure, but the basis on which it's written needs to have that integrity, I think.
There's an interesting comment, Rod, in the chat, which is, my students want to visit Weston-super-Mare because it's drawn in the background of the picture. We love to look for things in the picture. Well, Weston-super-Mare, I've been there. It's very nice. Yes, I would recommend it.
It's like Bondi Beach, really.
Except, yeah, it's kind of muddy.
Yeah, well, we have a property in Weston-super-Mare, you see, and I used to go there as a child for my holidays. It's a very big, wide, sandy beach. And Alex came with his family to stay with me in my apartment there. And on one occasion, we built a huge sand castle on the beach, and it was Floppy the dog, you see. We had this wonderful, which I put a photograph in there, my presentation, of this great sand castle we made, showing Floppy the dog. And as we walked away from the beach with all our stuff, all our beach accoutrements, all our stuff we had on the beach, a little boy ran up as fast as he could, and he jumped on Floppy and completely wrecked the castle, didn't he?
By the way, there's a comment which says, is that magic key on the wall of Mr. Brychta's room? Yes, there's one there, but this is the real magic key. Here is the actual magic key.
That magic key, you never guess right. I found that in a junk shop. Guess where? Weston-super-Mare. Of
Yes, Rod has one just like that.
Shop window. Look at this, to my wife. Look at these in the shop windows, junk shop. 2 huge brass keys. I must buy them, and they cost me a tenner, £10. £5
I'm still waiting for mine to work, Rod.
Well, they do work. You see, I always say the magic key is really going into a daydream in your mind's eye,
Yeah.
having this daydream.
I just wonder if there has been any story that you really wanted to make, but couldn't be published for any reason, or some stories that you really wanted to make, but gave up putting publishing it for some reason, if there is any.
I once did a story about a clown, and the children met this clown. It was quite a sad story. The clown had retired, and he was an old man, and they got him to put his clown makeup on, and he entertained them after all, because although he had no work now, the clown, an out of work clown. And I called him Pogo the Clown. And my editor said, I can't bear clowns, and clowns are quite tricky because there's a lot of people who have dressed up as clowns and been quite violent and they've been terrorists, in fact, or gangsters with clown makeup on. That's quite spooky. So I never published the story of Pogo the Clown. And I'm very glad I didn't, because there was a clown character in the US called Pogo the Clown, and he committed I think he committed murder. So I was very pleased that my Pogo the Clown story was never published.
Very interesting.
On a similar theme, we have actually published books which later became unacceptable. And one that I can think of is, not too many, but one I can think of is the dolphin pool. And that was a story when it was allowed to have dolphins in captivity. And, in many countries you still can, like, SeaWorld in America, they still have killer whales and dolphins, and they have daily shows. And so we did a book many, many years ago when it was still possible to do that in the UK. And of course, at one point it became unacceptable and in fact illegal to hold dolphins in captivity. And that book had to be withdrawn from the schools, from sales. There you go, you've got, yeah, Hiroko has the actual book. Hiroko, that is now a collector's item.
Yes, so I will keep it forever. Thank you.
The film Free Willy, I think, was a final nail in that one. I think
yes.
It actually happened to my family. The splash. We sat in these seats because nobody else was sitting in them near the front of the pool. And the joke is, of course, the orca, the killer whale, splashes in them. We got soaking wet. It actually happened to us in SeaWorld. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Very interesting.
Just one more question. Is it okay?
Yeah.
Are you going to write about the grown-up children? But Times Chronicles is the end.
Yes.
They will stay that age.
You saw my picture of Mum when she was 48, sitting at the table. That would be quite funny. We did do this once. We did draw them. Alex did draw them when they were older, and Kipper had grown a beard, hadn't he, Alex? I think, if you remember that. Do you remember doing that?
Yes.
We had them doing all kind. We did it for a joke once, for a reps conference. The reps who sell the books. We did a presentation and we made up some spoof stories about Biff, Chip, Kipper, and their friends, all much older. And some of them were a bit saucy, a bit rude. Some of these books we pretended to have written.
I see there's a comment that we in Japan are not able to make a sandcastle because of the dry sand. So that was also a story that we learned, the difference between UK and Japan. I think there are probably more profound differences between UK and Japan than the sand. And I think you might be able to find, if you go closer to the surf, where the sand gets wet, moist, you might be able to successfully build a sand castle even in Japan. Right, any more questions?
Everything you work on together is with Oxford, or have you done other projects?
Yes. No, it's all, yeah, go on, Rod.
Well, everything's with Oxford, yes, it is. It's been our life's work, really. It's been 35 years of dedicated work. We've done nothing else at all. I did before I began with Oxford, I wrote for various publishers. I was a teacher, and I wrote for about 6 or 7 different publishers while I was teaching. I taught for 27 years, and I taught in secondary and primary schools. I didn't teach infants, I'm sorry to say, but I did teach all age groups. And I began to write in the 1970s and get published. And I finally managed to give up teaching full-time in 1979, before many of you were born, of course. And that's when I wrote the Oxford Junior Readers. And I began writing those when I was teaching in a school in Oxford. And I worked with a guy called Mike Poulton, and I wrote the stories, and I would go in after school. And on 2 occasions after a day's teaching, I went to Oxford University Press. We had something to eat. We began working about 6:30 in the evening, and we worked through the night until 5 o'clock in the morning. And I came home and I shaved and I had a breakfast and I went and did a day's teaching. So on 2 occasions, I sat up all night long. Alex is used to that. He does it all the time, Alex, don't you? But it was very, very hard work. Getting into publishing, when you're not an established writer, getting into publishing is very difficult. And the problem that young authors have is that publishers are prepared not to give them a very good deal. I mean, I've been very lucky, Alex and I've been very lucky to have had 35 years of continuous work with one publisher, with an extraordinarily unusual story. Most people do a book or 2 and have to work hard to find a publisher for their next book. But for us to have written, I think between us, we've written 650 books or illustrated and collaborated on 650 stories. It's very unusual. So we have been very, very fortunate in our careers to have managed to last that long.
Yeah, I have to admit, Paul, that I did do a little bit of moonlighting in the early days. I think it was probably about 5-6 years after we started on the Reading Tree. I was approached, in fact, twice it happened. One, there was a publishing house called Blackwell, and there's another one called Heinemann. And at the time, I didn't know, well, not Rod and I didn't know actually how long the Oxford Reading Tree was going to go on. And I thought, well, you know, I don't want to turn work down. Being a freelance illustrator, that is in every freelance illustrator's genes anyway, is never to say no if you're offered work. So I was approached by these publishers to do a little project for them, and I did. And the first time with Blackwell's, nothing much happened. And the second time I did that, it was only 6 books for Heinemann. It was it was received very badly at Oxford University Press, and I was asked if I'd read my contract, and I said, well, not in any great detail. And they said, well, read it. And so I read it, and it said that while I'm working for Oxford University Press on a specific project, which in this case was a reading scheme, then I am not allowed to work for a competing publisher on the same kind of material. And with Heinemann, it was also a reading scheme that I did about 6 books for. But they were not happy about it. And I said, okay, I'm not going to do it again. And luckily I didn't have to, because as Rod said, you know, we're very lucky to have lasted with the same publisher for 35 years.
Can I ask a question?
How good the books are, for sure.
Sorry?
I said a testament to the quality of your stories and the illustrations. It's just they really are unique in even the field.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, I want to ask Kazushi, your background. It's wonderful. What is it?
Thank you. It's called 合掌造り in where? It's an old house. Japanese
高山、
traditional.
平高山、
Mhm.
平高山。
Well, anyway, it's lovely. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
And that KO2's got, I'm ticking at people who've got wonderful backgrounds. Yes, wonderful.
Just reading next door, a Chinese family moved next to Kippa's family. I really thought it was interesting. I assume you want to make the community with various nationalities. I was thrilled when I read it for the first time. Yeah, I mean, we've covered that. You know, we try to be inclusive with all kinds of cultures and nationalities. And Yoko has the book next door. So I think we should have some Japanese family move on the other side next door to them.
Well, I've got to go and cook lunch now, Alex, I think.
It's your lunchtime, is it? Okay.
I'm the cook in our family.
Well, and of course, our audience, I suppose, will be going to dinner, if not going to bed. So,
thank you, everybody, for staying with us.
Well, thank you very much. There are 86 people still staying to talk with 86.
the others have fallen asleep. Yes.
Thank you so much for coming and joining us.
You're welcome.
We had a
It's been
great
fun.
time.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
And please come back to Japan someday again.
Oh, we'd
Yeah,
love
yes,
to.
yes. Be sure to.
We'd love to. Okay, I'm going to leave you now. So thanks again for having us, and
Thank you.
keep up the good work.
Yes.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.